nothing has transformed video games like the advent of the internet.
We literally had to stop selling units because we were selling them faster than we could make servers to actually keep the game running.
Come here, Darky, come here.
Suddenly, virtual game worlds were connected.
I can play with people from all over the world. And that was ecstasy.
And alternative lives emerged in an addictive new genre of video game.
Every kid's dream.
Games are definitely leading us to a point where we'll be enslaved by machines. I think that's pretty obvious.
Is there going to be that day where someone can completely persist in a video game?
Well, you're about to find out. In the last few decades, the world has undergone sweeping changes in the way we live our lives. And perhaps nothing has changed as much as the way in which we relate to one another. Instead of communicating face-to-face, we now interact in shared, often virtual spaces.
If you think about it, it's amazing that people from around the world, wherever they are, can in real time be digitally connected in a shared virtual world experience.
This new phenomenon in social interaction has affected every form of entertainment, including video games. Because while some worked feverishly to improve the artificial intelligence of computers, others were more intent on linking together the human mind.
As good as AI is, there's nothing more satisfying than playing with or against another human being. So the internet has definitely changed the way we make games.
And in turn, the information highway has transformed a whole new generation of players.
They listen to their iPods, they IM, they update their blog and watch television all at once. And if you take one of those away, they recognize it's taken away and they're annoyed about it. Making games for that, because we didn't do that growing up, we did one thing at once.
But the seeds of this brave new virtual world were sown much earlier than we might think. In fact, the idea of the internet has been around since the 1950s.
And who knows, the housewife of tomorrow may do her shopping like this.
And contrary to today's applications, the internet's origins were far from entertaining.
The internet came from ARPANET, which was a military network created to survive nuclear war.
The Cold War had already begun.
The dawn of the space age.
After the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the United States created ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, in order to regain the lead in science and technology. ARPA soon developed IPTO, the Information Processing Technology Office, which had networked country-wide radar systems for the first time. After years of collaboration between ARPA, private companies like Honeywell Technologies, and several US colleges, the first node went live at UCLA on October 29, 1969, on what would be called ARPANET.
Pretty much as soon as people plugged computers into each other, they started playing games between them.
Richard Bartle and his partner Roy Trubshaw, both students at Essex University in the UK, developed a defining game that would take advantage of this new connectivity.
It was quite interesting, you know, you'd be talking to some guy from Japan and some guy from San Diego, and then there'd be somebody who was sitting 2 seats away from you.
In the spring of 1979, the programmers launched a multi-user game that would later be called MUD.
A MUD is short for multi-user dungeon or domain. It's a textual online world where people interact with a virtual fantasy setting using text commands.
Somebody, usually a dungeon master, would actually run this and would tell people as they took different actions what the results of those actions were. So they weren't terribly automated. It was really just driven by human beings using the early internet and early chat rooms to recreate, kind of a multiple player virtual dungeon experience.
In the early 1990s, technology was exploding, setting the stage for the World Wide Web. And the virtual worlds made possible by MUDs would grow into something visual, addictive, and massive. The 1990s brought with them sweeping cultural and technological changes that would serve as a springboard for the World Wide Web.
There's an explosion of informational technologies, communication, interconnectedness.
Thank you for calling Amazon.com.
A lot of households had PCs, we had good bandwidth, and the political climate was so that even the state would actually subsidize broadband.
And the digital revolution was instrumental in spawning a bevy of virtual world games.
By the time the web really came into being on a commercial level, there were a lot of people itching to be able to get online, essentially, to play, especially in a graphic 3D environment.
Fans of text-based role-playing games in the early 1980s could now enjoy the immersive 3D worlds of the MMO, making the games that much more inviting.
An MMO is short for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. It's a game where you can create your own character and have an adventure in a world and meet other people, and you would collaborate, interact with them, or compete with them in a fantasy world setting.
When it was people playing in the basement, it was just, a dozen people at most, but now all of a sudden they're participating with hundreds of thousands of people, millions potentially, and that changes the nature of the experience they're having.
Played over the internet, MMOs are visually stunning and contain vast landscapes where gamers can play, socialize, wreak havoc, and create complex stories. And one of the first MMO experiences came in 1991 when Neverwinter Nights was released.
The first version of Neverwinter Nights was on AOL, and this was one of the first massively multiplayer online games.
The game was made with 2D graphics, but compared to the text-based MUDs of the past, it was a monstrous leap forward.
There was a certain percentage of the population that was going to buy into a virtual community that was text-based. But once they started becoming graphical and visual, a greater and greater percentage of people said, oh, I see, I can see you, and then I can click on you, as opposed to I'm just typing your name.
While Neverwinter Nights was limited to AOL subscribers, it was Ultima Online that became the first breakout hit. Released in 1997, the game had a typical Dungeons & Dragons type conceit.
This Britannia is but one of many in the multiverse that is Ultima Online.
Ultima Online was the one that really kind of blew it wide open and showed the potential of a massively multiplayer online game and what we could actually do in terms of community. So in some ways, it's kind of the grandfather of all the MMOs that have come since then.
Lord British, who was the creator of Ultima Online, had worked, I would say, probably 15 years in the PC and Amiga sphere creating Ultima games. And I think there had been up to 9 or 8 Ultima games, each building a brand awareness and a community of gamers who really followed his every step.
Britannia. It was Britannia. It was this country with these sort of old English, kind of influences, these little towns. The whole thing was played in a bird's eye view, and it was fun.
But Ultima Online was soon replaced by an even bigger title that would overtake the online gaming market for years to come: EverQuest.
We actually called it Evercrack at the office. That took over people's lives.
John Smedley, who was working at Sony Computer Entertainment in the late 1990s, convinced his boss to take a risk on a new idea for a multiplayer online game.
We had no idea what we were getting into when we made it, or how much it would cost, or any of that stuff. We just thought, oh, this won't take long. 3 years later, I can't say exactly how much, but it wasn't cheap.
think EverQuest was, pretty special in that it was kind of the first 3D MMO. It was the first game that came out and presented a fantasy world in 3D and really immersed you in that environment, and it gave a glimpse of what you could do in that type of environment.
To be the first to get this glimpse of the future, gamers all over the world logged on to play when it launched in the spring of 1999.
So many users came in the first day that the servers were crashing. We could not keep them up because the bandwidth was not there.
The popularity of games like EverQuest had a cumulative effect. The more people played them, the faster the word spread.
It's a real toss-up, whether it's the game activities or the social activities that draw people in. That people spend as much time just standing around talking to each other as they do going out on quests or battling monsters.
MMOs, with their expanding capabilities, appealed to a wide array of people, many of whom did not consider themselves traditional gamers.
We live in a global society. We are part of a system that's much larger than ourselves. And these games play into that need to both be a part of a large system, but also somewhat in control of that very large global system.
Nick Yee, a PhD student in sociology at Stanford University, has focused his attention on studying the social dynamics that develop in MMOs in what he calls the Daedalus Project.
You have different kinds of groups. You have really short-term groups that are really task-oriented. They last 5 minutes. They're called pickup groups, 5 minutes, half an hour, really short-term groups. And other really long-term organizations called guilds. So play organizations where there's one leader, maybe several high-level officers, and 50 or 200, 250 members.
You can play it any way you want, but it just turns out that for human beings to be effective in groups, there generally has to be somebody in charge. And MMOs are realistic enough in their social dynamics that has evolved on its own in those environments. We kind of recreated early human civilization and tribalism.
For a long time, interactive entertainment or gaming, video gaming, was a solitary experience. But really what you're seeing is that people want to be able to play with each other in the same way that you used to play parlor games. So you play board games with your family or your friends.
You shuffle the pack with sorry, and then you start playing sorry. Anyone can play sorry.
It's a wonderful Parker game.
And the crazy thing about games and their competitiveness is that somehow it's as though we're using the competition to manage our feelings of closeness and affection toward each other and keep each other at a safe distance while we spend time with each other.
Perhaps the most successful MMO of all time is World of Warcraft. The immersive graphics and addictive plot lines have netted enough users to form a small country of their own.
There are anywhere north of 7 million people that are currently playing World of Warcraft right now. That's a large group of people to be playing.
Role-playing in a world where it doesn't end when you press the off button, it's sort of always persisting, and you can, meet friends, and you can, build your character, and you can, sort of bling it out with all this gear, and you can buy new items, and, have your potions, and it's an amazing sort of online world that's always changing, and it's completely unpredictable.
World of Warcraft is the new golf, is one of the memes that's going around Silicon Valley now, because gaming executives and other people are doing that to sort of socialize and network.
A new phenomenon in MMOs is basing games on existing movie titles. Star Wars Galaxies was the first game to risk a popular movie brand on an MMO.
We were the first kind of big, massively multiplayer online game based on an existing intellectual property. And Star Wars is very, very different from the fantasy kind of genre that we've seen in all the other massive multiplayer games.
Lucas's universe that he created is so finely detailed, and there's so many micro experiences and base battles between good and evil that it created a great playing field to create a lot of games.
The idea was like you'd be in this virtual world, and you don't know when Darth Vader's ship's going to land over there, and he's going to come up and force choke you. And that's sort of the idea that this is a persistent Star Wars world was sort of the pitch.
The difficult part for multiplayer online games, however, is preparing them for a worldwide audience. After all, players are not just individuals sitting alone at their terminals. The global audience is made up of many nations, tribes, and different worldviews.
There's a Korean game called Lineage, and forming groups is part of the whole design. And a lot of people have said that it's a very Korean game. It's an expression of Korean culture, that the ultimate goal in these games is to get in a group and become really powerful within the group. Where the online games that are associated with America are very individualistic.
Only the appearance of a stranger saved Cesaria from impending destruction.
Although the games have a tremendous, if not fanatic, fan base, critics of the genre warn that these games have become too good.
The key to the addictiveness is, I want to get a better piece of something. I want a better loaf. I want a better sword.
It also taps into, a reward feedback system that in real life we don't always get so directly. In the real world, you successfully complete your commute. Nobody gives you 5 experience points for that. You just got to work.
They definitely have people who work in the gambling industry come in and consult. They know that there's a certain point in your brain when you want some kind of reward for the work that you've done.
There is even a website devoted to helping people who are addicted to MMOs. One in particular was started by a mother who feels she lost her son to one of the multiplayer games.
He couldn't stay off it. That's how strong that game is. You can't just get up and walk away.
In order to help cope with the death of her son, Liz Woolley of Hudson, Wisconsin, created Online Gamers Anonymous, a support website devoted to helping gamers quit.
This is sort of her idea of creating a 12-step program for figuring out how to sort of help people wean themselves off an addiction to video games.
In China, the military is pioneering a new addiction treatment program to wean young men off video games.
You can carry it too far, and definitely the multiplayer online games have been examples of that, where people have just completely stopped their life and played these things instead of living in the real world.
If you're not a gamer yourself and you're watching your kid completely engrossed with a medium that makes no sense to you, it's a terrifying experience. So I don't blame parents for being upset or being freaked out. I just think that we didn't do a very good job of educating them about what this new medium was and what it was their kids were experiencing through it.
It's not escapism. Escapism doesn't even cover what it is. It's the ability to become who you really are. Now, why would anybody not want to do that?
These kids are learning how to mastermind organizing whole communities of people, or learning how to be democratic. It's very different than the mere picture suggests.
He's exploring stuff that he knows is not real people. And he's going into a safe place to work out his emotions because he's absolutely certain there's nobody there. And the kid's working through his emotions. It's the opposite of a sociopath, a person who doesn't make a distinction.
If it's not games, what else is it? I mean, it's football on Sundays. It's, there's always something social to pick on. Well, guess what? There's an off button on computers. If you decide not to play the games, fine.
Sir, will you hold on just a minute? Someone else is trying to reach me.
If you go back and read studies from when the telephone was introduced, there were a lot of completely alarmist pieces saying, oh my goodness, people will never meet face-to-face again, ever, because they're just going to use the telephone everywhere. And as every new communication technology is rolled out, we've seen very similar concerns that this is going to be the end of humanity's, interaction with other people.
The way kids are growing up today, they've never known a social experience where the internet wasn't a part of it. And I think they're actually going to be, ironically, better equipped to deal with the kinds of electronic entertainment in the future than my generation is, because we don't know when to stop. And I think the kids growing up today, they've got a better sense of how to balance that stuff out.
We've heard stories of people playing games for 18 hours. We've heard stories of people killing each other for items in EverQuest or World of Warcraft because their buddies sell it on eBay. But that was in the early days. I think once people get used to it and it's all around them, it's pervasive, then the newness of it wears off and the shock value of it wears off.
My parents, are really happy about what I've been doing.
Alessandro Avallone, one of the top-ranked professional gamers in Italy, is an example of someone who's getting a lot out of his gameplay. In fact, like many young gamers, he's learned how to make a career out of it.
I travel around the world and I'm having fun and, I'm actually winning some good money.
The advent of multiplayer tournaments has given way not only to large conventions, but a growing and competitive gaming circuit that offers millions of dollars in prizes and endorsements each year.
QuakeCon was and is a convention. It was an opportunity for these people to get out of their basements and get out of their dorms and just road trip across the country and game. Come here, Darkin, come here. Oh.
Taking place each summer in the first-person shooter hub of Dallas, Texas, QuakeCon offers $100,000 in prizes and attracts visitors from all over the world.
My team and I are about to play Fatality's team, and we're going to take him down.
And no gamer is as famous or as feared as five-time world champion Jonathan Wendell, better known by the pseudonym Fatality. The Kansas City native is a professional electronic sports player who's won over $500,000 in cash and prizes from professional competitions.
He's truly a spokesperson for the industry and is also one of the person that will really truly lead professional gaming to the mainstream. Try and make people understand and aware of the fact that this is a sport, this is serious, this is not just a game.
Although some believe the technology is isolating young people, these conferences are actually gathering gamers in traditional social groups, and competitions continue to grow in popularity. The next generation of gamers, however, might have little need for competition.
There's also now the trend of massively multiplayer games where you're a creator as well.
It's a lot more like the web in that sense, that you can come in and use it for whatever you want it to be.
These multiplayer games aren't games at all, but rather digital worlds to live out second lives. A new you at your fingertips. The internet has launched a slew of sword and sorcery games and changed the way we play together forever. However, the consensus among video game programmers seems to be that the next generation of video games aren't really games at all.
For someone who's used the web, I'd say, think about it as the web, only 3D and with other people.
Second Life, made by San Francisco-based Linden Lab, is an example of a multiplayer online community with much more freedom than a traditional video game.
Second Life is a platform, a social platform where people can create a lot of content. So there's a very different dynamic between Second Life and MMOs.
With well over 1 million users already signed up, Second Life is growing at the exponential rate of 15% a month.
We're trying to make it as available to everyone as possible, and you don't have to pay to get it. And what you get right away is a comprehensive set of tools to create 3D content.
In Second Life, you got a full 3D persistent virtual world where users can not only create objects like houses and cake shops and motorcycles and hover bikes, but they can also script the objects to be interactive.
Wagner James Au is a journalist who explores Second Life, writing a daily blog about the human interest stories he witnesses. He describes Linden Lab's role in the game.
Almost like a god that's created the world and gets more and more distant until finally you're in the world and the world is yours to build on and yours to continue. Basically, there's no one there, so you have to decide. It's almost a existentialist question. Well, who am I? What am I going to do in this world?
And a lot of people are stuck in jobs that they perceive are dead-end jobs or are really grueling, grinding, tedious jobs. They feel like they can't control the world, that the world is scripted out for them. And they move into these virtual worlds and they're no longer the nameless secretary in a faceless corporation. They're someone of power. These games are constructed so that everyone can become a hero.
In order to enter a social role-playing game like Second Life, you must first choose a character or avatar.
The reason why people sometimes shift to the more generic term avatar is sometimes it doesn't have to be a human-like character.
The beauty of avatars, the beauty of these virtual representations is they can be whoever we want them to be. So I happen to be of medium height, but when I play in the virtual world, I tend to be a little taller. I tend to be a little thinner. I tend to be a little stronger and faster.
People spend hundreds of hours dressing up their avatars in Second Life with what users call skins.
Avatar is a really interesting word. It kind of reminds me when the term action figure was coined. It was coined when G.I. Joe came out because there was already Barbie, and the company that made G.I. Joe wanted to sell these dolls to boys, but boys don't play with dolls. Boys play with action figures. Similarly, adults don't play with dolls. They play with avatars.
Second Life charts the genders and ages of all of its users, and they've come up with some interesting numbers.
It's something like 80% of female characters in MMOs are being played by men. There are some really interesting things to think about there about masculinity and how women in the last 20 or 30 years have been encouraged to be more masculine in a lot of ways, but it's still complete anathema for men to be feminine.
I think there's a great deal of self-transformation going on. And for me, what's interesting from a psychological perspective is how does that influence how they behave with each other online, and does that carry out to real life?
I think there's an element of escapism with the virtual worlds. In the same way as, people like to escape into celebrity gossip. They like to feel like they can, have a fantasy of what life is like in this, other more rarefied world.
Calling it escapism immediately prejudices all discussions into a negative space because escapism is viewed negatively. Instead, I think it's interesting to think about where people are spending their time. We see people using online games trading off their television viewing time, for example. So here they are taking time away from a consumptive passive activity that also tends to be a solo activity and moving into an interactive, collaborative social activity. So right away, it's interesting to look at that and say, well, that's probably a good thing.
Some characters go way beyond gender transformation and choose an avatar in the form of an animal or object.
Animal identification is like a totem. There are lots of cultures throughout the world that have believed in totems and getting in touch with your totem. Are you a wolf or an eagle or a hawk? A concept of the animal inside and which animals do you identify with.
There's starting to be a whole body of research that how you present yourself in a virtual world, independent of sort of the visual representation, a lot of who you are tends to come across anyway.
If you dress up in some nice shirt and you do your hair and everything, your contact lenses, okay, you're an avatar. That's some virtualization of you.
In his years as an embedded reporter, Wagner James Au has come across countless stories of users augmenting their lives through the use of virtual worlds.
So a lot of people meet in Second Life and then they carry it over to the real world, and a lot of times they fall in love. And so Second Life is a way of bringing them together.
What a lot of the stories of people who are handicapped in real life will talk about is that it's really given them a sense of control and agency back to them in their lives.
The stories, however, aren't always uplifting. Life isn't always rosier the second time around.
I've read about a guy who kind of fell in love with someone in the US and he flew all the way from Germany and it didn't work, and all of a sudden he's in the middle of the US not knowing where to go. So that happens too.
In Second Life, you can find real-life politicians running for office, virtual photo studios, or even a live rock concert.
I did a story about private detectives who investigate if your lover is cheating on you in Second Life. And so they will set up a sting operation.
You can be anyone you want to be in Second Life. But this isn't the only social MMO attracting fans. Active World, based in Massachusetts, is a quickly growing alternative universe.
You can actually create an entire world that other people can join as a tourist. They can sort of tour your world and sort of take a real estate tour of your world. If they like it, much like buying a house, they can sign up and actually become a participant in this world.
And one of the most popular social MMOs is a game called Entropia.
Good evening. I'm Sarah King. Tonight we report on something truly spectacular. We will take you inside the virtual universe of Project Entropia.
Designed by Swedish software company Mindark, The game is a futuristic virtual universe. The Entropia online community has almost 500,000 registered participants from over 200 countries.
Entropia is a great example of a game that links the real world and the real world currency to a virtual world. And I mean, there are cases of people spending, literally like hundreds of thousands of real dollars buying real estate in this virtual world.
John Jacobs, known as the avatar Never Die, mortgaged his real house in Miami to purchase a nightclub in the virtual world of Entropia. He made his money back in less than a year.
I grossed $100,000 after 8 months of operation. I have a shopping mall. There's 64 shops. The going rate right now is about $750 a shop. All these people are making, little profits here and there on various items.
In fact, virtual economies are a phenomenon found throughout MMOs.
The price of anything in Star Wars Galaxies is controlled by the players. You're more likely to go buy a blaster from somebody who's built it in the game, and they determine how much to charge for it based on laws of supply and demand.
Julian Dibble, the author of the new book Play Money, spent a year working up to making a living in the virtual economies of online role-playing games. He did it by buying and selling virtual items in exchange for real-world currency.
So you get something that somebody else needs, and they have something that you need, and you trade. Once that's happening, well, why don't we simplify this and introduce a currency? And once you have that going, the economy starts to happen. It's that simple.
And so when you go on eBay, you'll see characters and items from these virtual worlds being sold on eBay. And people would ask, well, why would you give real money for that? Well, because there was, say, 100 hours that went into that character. And 100 hours of my time has value, and I can even tell you monetarily what that value is.
If one guy's in there and he's going to be blowing money, then there's another guy in there that's going to be able to make money.
Making a living in a virtual world could someday become a common occurrence.
The last figures I saw from Linden Lab were that 3,000 people were making a real-life income of $20,000 a year and up. The most famous one is Anshe Chung. The real-life analog lives in Germany, and she makes an estimated $150,000 a year.
Anshe Chung has also become the first real millionaire in Second Life by buying and selling virtual real estate.
The way people make a living in Second Life falls in two categories, which I call either the Donald Trump or the Donna Karan model. In other words, there's a lot of people who make a living by being real estate barons. The other model, like I said, is the Donna Karan model. There's a huge market for people to improve their avatars, their alter egos.
So virtual real estate in Second Life is a very important concept. Second Life is currently simulating a space of about 180 square kilometers. That's about 3 times the size of Manhattan. So that's being done on around 3,000 CPUs. So how do we control who gets access to all that computing horsepower? Well, how we do that is through the idea of real estate.
Any object you create, you own the underlying IP rights to. I kind of call that the Declaration of Independence for Second Life. If you kind of compare it to America, this is sort of the point where there's a real sense of a social contract happening.
People make bars, clubs, hotels, rental properties, homes, and people have tried lots of different ways to figure out whether you need to pay or not to come into those spaces. So just like in the real world, to go into a good dance club, there's a line and you pay at the door.
But just like the real world, social contracts are based on trust. Some companies actually work as middlemen for buying and selling virtual goods.
You trust the person to deliver that virtual gold for you. There's also this issue of efficiency. How quickly can you deliver that gold for me?
The economy on Earth is seamlessly linked to the economy on Calypso, making your money valid on both worlds.
Although these transactions are generally condoned by the game makers these days, that's not always true of the users, particularly when it comes to traditional MMOs.
First of all, it's considered total anathema to actually buy money in the games. No players will actually admit that they're buying items or money because it throws off the whole balance of the game.
If you were to go off onto the internet and buy a level 60 character, that doesn't mean that you are actually a level 60 player. It just means you've bought that character, and when other people see it and find out that you're not really good at playing, they're not going to like you at all. You've wasted your money because you've bought status that isn't yours.
Regardless of the ethical debate, there's always been an explosion of new marketing opportunities for both large and small companies in these virtual worlds.
So for example, American Apparel, which is a real-world clothing designer, just put a store in Second Life.
Or you can go in and you can buy an American Apparel outfit and you can wear it on your avatar.
It's also raising awareness of the American Apparel brand. They're also getting information on what people buy and sell and are interested in. And I think they're just one of the first movers coming into this space, and I expect we're going to see a lot more of that.
In Second Life alone, transactions have reached a rate of $2.7 million per month. Brands that have already appeared in virtual worlds include Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Levi's, Chrysler, and Adidas.
This is where Second Life can become the next generation of the web, where instead of logging into Amazon on a 2D web interface, you can actually go into a virtual version of Amazon and you can look at the book that you want to get and then you can order it.
Even small businesses are finding opportunities in multiplayer venues. Scott Rongleen, artistic director of Los Angeles theatre troupe The Next Arena, is promoting his company's latest play on Second Life.
Check. Did you hear what I said? I heard what I said.
This is a play that deals a lot with the subconscious, so we thought it'd be cool to premiere part of it in a virtual world.
The theatre troupe did it by approaching virtual film company Studio Shores. Run by Avatar's Silver and Goldie Goodman, the real-life filmmakers are pioneering content in this virtual world.
In Second Life, the camera can float wherever you need, and it makes filmmaking just a thrill because of the angles and the movements that you can make.
There are many different ways to make money in these virtual worlds. Julian Dibble was clever enough to sell his book on virtual economies inside a virtual economy.
He's selling a copy of his book in Second Life. It's the full book, and he'll autograph it for you because there's technology where his avatar can autograph the book.
People in the economics community are even starting to track these virtual transactions.
Once you have those values and you understand how much of the stuff is being produced, as an economist, you can go in and say with confidence that EverQuest has a gross domestic product of $135 million a year, a GDP.
The per capita GDP in EverQuest was higher than China or Russia, which is kind of mind-blowing because you think about it, a kid in India with access to a PayPal account in EverQuest could earn more real-world money in the virtual world than for hundreds of miles around his village.
We think money's real, right? We think it's real. And we forget that money is invented by fiat, that the Fed literally wishes this stuff into existence and declares its value.
I mean, I think of money as the original virtual technology because it's standing in for other things that aren't there, but that you can project in your imagination and your desire.
So to that degree, it's not so much that there's not the ability to separate reality from the virtual. It's that the virtual has taken on real value.
I honestly think that we're moving to a much greater globalization with the virtual realities. Because the amazing thing about virtual realities is that there are absolutely no borders and there is a tremendous amount of trade going on.
Most of today's virtual worlds have been built by commercial entities for entertainment purposes. The majority are conceived of as games, but perhaps over time, the term virtual world will expand to cover a broader range of uses in the entertainment, education, medical, and military industries.
One of the great things about virtual worlds today is it feels a lot like the web did in 1994. In 1994, every company, every organization had that sort of one crazy person who was saying, we have to get on the web, we need to get a website. And the rest of the company was sort of saying, what? And then 4 years later, they were buying their namespace for, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Some programmers look forward to a time when the entire world goes virtual. Others argue that day is already here. Almost 50 years since its debut, the video game is still growing and evolving.
I think today video games have gotten much more powerful. They're far more complex than I could ever comprehend. The reality simulations are getting so good now that it's a different world.
I think we're just at the beginning of understanding the possibilities of video gaming.
It's surpassed films. The prediction that I saw from Bear Stearns last year was that it was going to surpass music this year. And their long-term projection was that by 2008, games would be making more than both industries combined.
The combination of rich 3D landscapes, advanced storytelling, and the unique opportunity for users to author their own experience has helped video games become the dominant form of entertainment in the world. And it's a medium that will only get better in the future.
I think you're going to continue to see fighting games, role-playing games, platformers, sports games, and there'll be some new breakthrough form that will surprise us all.
We're also working on another technology called Euphoria, and that simulates basically the way that our nervous systems react when any kind of impact is applied.
I think in the next couple years, you're going to see that advance to the point to where you are in the computer, or this version of you is in the computer.
This has always been the case in games, but each stage of evolution has brought gamers closer to the lucid dream that is today's video game. First, the interface had to evolve to draw us deeper into the experience. Then the characters had to be born to compel us to stay there. Next, the world had to grow around us so we'd sense the possibilities of the medium. And the mind of the game had to both vex us and unleash our creativity.
Speak quickly.
Farewell.
Tomorrow's video games won't always be about challenging us. Rather, they'll be about transporting us to wherever we want to go.
As we get more horsepower in our cell phones, we're only going to see more ways of everybody being able to spend parts of their lives in virtual worlds if they want to.
People who used to run home to play Tetris on a computer now watch their children play on a cell phone or a portable media device.
All this interactive media, how does it become a way for people to relate to each other, communicate their emotions, their values, their cultural interests to other people? And when everything shakes out, it's not going to be about the graphics. It's going to be about, is this a medium that people can use to communicate what they care about to each other?
I think what we're doing is starting to bring the game experience around us. So I think that's happening more and more, where the game is just kind of permeating the rest of our life.
好きな人はそこの世界に行けばいいかなと思いますけれども、いずれ現実と非現実の中でのやり取りをゲームがやってるんだっていう考え方さえもなくなると思うんですよね。それらがもう混在した世界がこれから未来は混在した世界になるんじゃないかなと思います。
The problem with video games and our play environments is that they make us think that the world we're living in when we're not playing them or when we're not watching TV, that this is real. We're living in a very programmed universe. It's not the Matrix as such, but it's not the way it seems either.
I think reality still remains a reality, and the game is just a game. I don't think the game world will take over our minds and lives.
There's a lot of people that like to go off the deep end, and thinking way science fiction, way out there. But we're human when it gets right down to it.
I don't think there was ever a time in human history when we weren't living in a virtual world. I frankly think this whole thing is silly, that we're all making a big deal out of, oh, we're in a virtual world now. We have language. You come and tell me something in ancient Sumerian that happened last week to someone that you never met, and I start picturing it in my head, and you go tell me that's not virtual. That's what being human is.
The idea of people living in a virtual world.
Now is the time.
I mean, it's not future. I mean, that's where they're at today. I mean, that's where there's a huge culture now that revolves around getting their self-worth, who they are as a person is in this other fantasy world.
Each year, new games are programmed to replace the old. and each incarnation brings us closer to a digital world almost imperceptible from our own. Someday soon, we may live our lives and experiences entirely within a video game, a world that doesn't exist, or rather, can't truly be touched.